Hey Andy, how are you?
Hi, good morning, Shavua Tov.
Just you're on Facebook, so don't say anything you wouldn't want the entire world to know.
Got it.
Everything is well?
Yeah, everything's well.
Okay,
Everything,
great.
yeah. How about by you?
Thank God. Thank God. Doing very well. Have no complaints whatsoever.
Yeah, good. That's good.
Get rid of this corona thing, that would be a good thing.
Well, a good step forward with a vaccine on the horizon. So,
100%.
whatever we have to do to try to reduce the number of lives lost until we can get it distributed, I'm in for.
Yeah, I think, and also I think the 30-second test is also going to be, because until we get the vaccine going, I think that'll also give a lot of confidence to people.
Yeah, I just don't know the efficacy of that 30-second test. I know we have faster tests here, and everybody says the only one you can really rely on to a high degree is the PCR. And so
Mm,
I don't know much about the 30-second test, but it's got to be better than nothing, I guess.
right. Hopefully it works. I mean, they seem to be very excited about it. So if they
Yeah.
are, they're excited about it, then hopefully it'll work. Hopefully. So, but
A
I think
lot of
if
a lot of it is, with all of that, it's just testing and tracing and masking and social distancing will get us there, but there's a lot of damage been done.
right,
We'll be in for a rough couple of months as we transition.
right. Well, look. Hopefully, I mean, I don't want to. Yeah. Hopefully, it can only get better.
Yeah, yeah, it will. I feel we have maybe one more down month and we'll be okay. I'm hoping.
We shall see. We shall see. Okay. Well, I like getting started on time, even if I'm talking to myself. And thankfully, I'm not talking to myself, so that's very good. We have an exciting packed Sunday here because I'm going to try to stretch my presentation here or shorten it depending on how it's going to about a half an hour, and then take some questions, and then we have a siyum on Daf Yomi did a CM on Masechet Eruvin. So we're gonna be transitioning into that CM and talking about nuance in Torah study. So that's what we'll be doing today. Okay, so here's my plan of action for today. This is the topic that I'm the speaker this week, so you're stuck with me. Next week we actually have a great speaker. So however bad I am this week, you'll enjoy next week's a lot more. We have the mayor of Efrat and the international spokesperson for Judea and Samaria, Oded Ravivi, who is I think has the potential to be an Israeli prime minister. I really do. He's a leader that I look up to, and so he'll be with us next week. And that's so. If you find yourself falling asleep this week, just make sure you're up by next Sunday at this time, and I'll pitch him again as we end today. Okay, so what I want to talk about is something that's obviously not controversial in the least bit, and that's what can we expect from a President Biden. Even the topic title is controversial because I have a lot of people who think that the words President Biden will never actually go together. They are convinced that President Trump will succeed in his lawsuits. And look, if he can, then that's the American way. That's great. I'll be more thankful that that I live in Israel because of the ensuing chaos that will undoubtedly happen and the exploding heads all over the place. But just one key rule here that I'm going to give as we start off is nobody, and when I say nobody, I mean nobody knows my own political beliefs. I'm an educator. And many people disagree with this approach, but as an educator, I find that it is best if I keep my political opinions to myself and just teach facts. So if you think that because I'm giving a talk about about Vice President or President-elect or future President Biden, and therefore you think that I like President Biden, or I'm going to be, you know, because I'll be complimenting him in certain places, that means that I'm a fan. Nobody knows even my wife, I don't tell her who I vote for, so that way I can develop students that are pro-Israel, that are both Democrats and Republicans, because the one thing that I will tell you is that I am a strong supporter of bipartisan support of the U.S.-Israel relationship. And therefore, if I have a student that's a Republican and I'm a Democrat, I don't want him to start thinking that being a Republican supporter of Israel is wrong, and vice versa. So you're not going to know my personal opinions. These are just, I'm going to teach you facts. I'm even going to try to avoid giving my own opinion on things. These are just things that are factual, and that doesn't mean you can't disagree with me. Plenty of people disagree with facts, and that's fine. And plenty of people will say that what I'm teaching is not facts, and that's also okay. And if you want to argue with me, that's also okay. I'm perfectly fine with that. It's rare a day that I've ever gone where somebody doesn't disagree with me. So that is perfectly okay. So you don't have to accept this as truth. This is not Torah Messina. I'm not even teaching Torah. This is going to be just what I see things. So we're going to do 4 things today. We're going to look at Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden, future President Biden, Joe. We're going to look at his relationship with Israel in terms of himself. Then we're going to look at Iran, the Palestinians, and settlements, because I think those are going to be the 3 biggest issues that we are going to, as what I assume as an inside Israel type of view, we want to see what we have coming for us in the next 4 years with the Vice President Biden and understand, or President Biden, and understand what that is, what that's going to entail. Okay, so let's get started. So first of all, is it true that Joe Biden hates Israel? Is it true that he is a secret, Israel hater? And for the next 4 years, we are in for a horrible time with a president that just absolutely hates Israel. So here's the good news. The answer is no, he doesn't hate Israel. That's the great news. He's not an Israel hater. In fact, I'll tell you, for those of you that are into the language of Israel lovers, so there's a test that we give all politicians, especially Gentile politicians, to see if they love Israel. Now, this test, it used to be a secret test, but it's become public, so much so that I just finished reading President Obama's book, and he talks about the test and talks about how he failed the test when it came to Israel. And this test is, I'll translate it afterwards, but it's the Kishka test. And President Obama says that he failed the Kishka test. What is the Kishka test? Is not a question of how well you do Shabbos morning at Kiddush with the Cholent. The Kishka test, is whether or not you love Israel in your Kishkas. All of us love Israel in our Kishkas, in our intestines. We all have a love of Israel it's in our Kishkas. We don't have to explain it to somebody. If somebody wants to know why we favor a strong relationship with Cuba, that's going to be something that we're going to have to explain. We have to put that into context and understand that. But if we love Israel, that's just in our kishkas. And not only is it in our kishkas, we expect it in our president, our senator, and our member of Congress's kishkas as well. And if they don't have it in their kishkas, we tend not to like them. So that's so now right. And President Obama says that he failed the Kishka test. He said that the AIPAC world and the pro-Israel community, I'm quoting him, deemed that he did not have Israel in his kishkas. Whether or not that's true or not, that's for you to decide. We've had plenty of time to get to know President Obama, so you can decide whether or not. But I will tell you this. From knowing Vice President Biden and Senator Biden, I will tell you that Israel is in this man's kishkas. Now, we might have a disagreement with him as to how you express your love. That might be, we might have some differences, and we'll go through them of things that we're concerned about. But if you wake up Joe Biden in the middle of the night and say, what do you think about Israel? He's going to say, Israel, I love Israel. It's not a position that he has to think about, why should America have a strong U.S.-Israel relationship? He understands why America has to have a strong relationship with Israel, and he loves Israel. He's described himself, as you see here in this headline, as a Zionist. And it says that you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. He really feels this way. He really, really does love Israel. Now, again, Plenty of people love things, and we look at them strangely how they express their love. But Joe Biden, in his heart, does, and in his kishkas, does love Israel. Everybody good? Okay. So that's something that's important to recognize, because that gives us a step ahead already. When we come in for a discussion with a President Biden and we want to discuss with him, hey, we feel Israel needs the following. So it's not a question of, well, is that need in the U.S. interest? He already understands and feels deeply that what Israel needs is in the U.S. interest, because he feels that in his kishkas. So that's a very important point to make. If anybody tells you that Vice President Biden doesn't love Israel, or President-elect Biden doesn't Israel, so just ask them, why do you think so? What has led you to believe that? And if it's, well, because he belongs to Democratic parties, it'd be like, well, a lot of Democrats love Israel, so that doesn't make any sense. And if they tell you that it's, well, just because, I don't know what else they're going to come, because he was part of the Obama administration, I'll say, okay, well, we don't know for sure if he agrees with President Obama's viewpoint on Israel. I don't think, especially after this book that just came out, I can't imagine that he would agree with what President Obama said about Israel. So I don't think that there's much that you can go on to say that President-elect Biden does not love Israel. I think he does. And again, now let's get into the meat of the matter, because as important as the Kishka test is, and it is important, we do also have to ask ourselves, okay, how is he going to express that love? Right? That's a big question, okay? Because that's really what matters to us. We don't need a president that loves us but doesn't show the love. We need a president that loves us, feels in his kishkas, and then shows it to us. Let's discuss first the most important thing. When I teach my students, I have students, just in case you don't know my background, I have students in high school and I have students in college. I teach those two age groups. And they're across the board, Jewish, not Jewish, Orthodox, not Orthodox. Doesn't make it. I'll teach anybody if they want to, if they step into my classroom, that's fine. So what I teach them, which is I think very important, is there are the three most important issues that Israel is dealing with right now in this order are Iran, Iran, and Iran. Those are the top three issues. There's really everything else comes way after those three, because Iran is the only country that has the potential at this point to be an existential threat to Israel. The Palestinians are not an existential threat to Israel. If Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, and Jordan, all, and Iraq, and I don't know, anybody else that wants to join in, all got together and said, let's attack Israel, we would think the 6-day war was the longest war we were ever in. Right? It would take us a number of hours to defeat their combined armies. Those are not existential threats to us. They wouldn't really be able to harm us too much. If we wanted to, we could end them in no time. Iran, if it develops a nuclear weapon, will be an existential threat to Israel. And that is something that's terrifying. And that's why we have to do everything we can to stop them, besides the fact that besides their nuclear weapons program, which they have, besides that nuclear weapons program, they also pose a threat because they're the largest state sponsor of terror. So all terror that is around the world, almost all terror, they have influence on, either because they fund it or they give training for it. But so Iran, that's a second problem. And the third problem is that Iran is developing a very strong ballistic missile program. A ballistic missile is different than just a regular missile. An intercontinental ballistic missile is what goes up into outer space and comes down. These are very sophisticated missiles, which will require us to have programs that are much more sophisticated than just an iron dome to stop them. I don't mean to scare anybody, and I hope I'm not boring anybody. I don't know if I'd rather you be bored or scared, but in either case, this is a real serious problem that we can't just brush aside. So the number one thing that we're going to need President-elect Biden to focus on is Iran. That is the most important thing. Now, one of the things that President-elect Biden has been very critical of President Trump about is the fact that he pulled out of the nuclear Iran deal. In 2015, America, along with 5 other countries, signed a deal with Iran to halt, stop, postpone, suspend their nuclear weapons program, depending on how you want to look at it. the pro-Israel community generally had a very big problem with this deal. They did not feel that this deal was sufficient. It wasn't sufficient to stop their nuclear weapons program, and it did nothing to address their ballistic missile program, and did nothing to address their sponsor of terrorism. So the deal was lacking in terms of what it was able to deliver on. So that's a problem. Now, Vice President Biden and President-elect Biden and the Biden administration feels they have to get back into the deal. Now, here's the problem. To his credit, Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden, I'm sorry for going over the terms over and over. I just want to be inclusive of everybody's feelings here. But Biden feels that the deal is faulty. He himself recognizes the faults. Even President Obama recognized there were faults to the deal, and he realizes there has to be a reworking of the deal. Anybody that signed a deal with somebody that afterwards you realize is not in your favor knows that to go back to the person you signed the deal with and say, hey, I'd like to rework the deal because I felt like we didn't get a good end of the bargain here. So the other person's just going to simply say, no, right? We're not redoing the deal. And there's no reason for us to redo the deal. That is Iran's position. Iran says that it won't accept any other parts of the deal. There's no renegotiating here. We signed the deal. America left it. You want to come back into it, that's great, but we're not going to restrict ourselves anymore. There's no reason for us to. So that is that's a big problem that Vice President Biden is going to have getting back into it. But it gets even worse. This is the foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif of Iran. He's a very smart player, this man here, because the foreign minister of Iran says, not only are we not going to renegotiate parts of the deal, but here's the problem. President Trump not only pulled out of the deal, but he increased sanctions, which goes against the deal. President Trump has sanctioned. I mean, it is with the amount of sanctions that he has put on, and he's not stopping. For the next 60 odd days, he's going to sanction Iran more. And he's not just sanctioning companies or entities or parts of the government. He's not only sanctioning people inside the nuclear weapons program, he has now extended his sanctions to people that are involved in the terrorism program, to people involved in the missile program, to anyone really that's going to be involved in defense. And these sanctions hurt. They really hurt because you cannot do business. I mean, they can't even order off of Amazon. I mean, that's how far reaching these sanctions are. And so he says, wait a minute, these sanctions that America has put on us over the last 4 years under the Trump administration, they've hurt and they've caused us problems. So now if you want to come back into the deal, says Iran, you're going to have to offer us compensation. Because we're not just going back into the deal. This puts President Biden in a tough spot because his campaign promise is to go back into the deal and to ensure the deal. But in order to get back into the deal, he's actually going to have to give Iran more. While his position is, no, we've got to stop Iran and restrict Iran more. So I'm not sure where or how President Biden is going to be able to do this. That's going to be a very, very sharp tightrope that he's going to have to walk. And I don't know how he does it. And what I am nervous about is that in order to fulfill a campaign promise, he gives up too much to get back into the deal. Now, I have no reason to think that he will do that. I'm not saying that that's my fear based on something, but that is the worst case scenario here, is that he gives in on everything. Another approach that he could do, which I personally would prefer, and I think that all of us would prefer, is that he continues the Trump sanctions and keeps increasing them until Iran says, okay, we'll come back into the deal. Tell us what you want, and we'll do it. That's hopefully where he will go with it. But there's no way any of us can know. A fear that we have is that if Israel sees that America is going to give up too much to go back into the deal, is that Israel attacks. Now, this is H.R. McMaster, who, by the way, I have to recommend his last book, Battlegrounds. Amazing book. I've never read somebody so intelligent from a military perspective. It's something that I've never seen before. But H.R. McMaster, who was President Trump's NSA director, says that Israel can get too scared of what President-elect Biden might do, and they just might simply attack. The same way they attacked Syria's nuclear reactor in 2007 and Iraq's nuclear reactor in the early 80s. they could do that again. And that would bring on a regional war. Iran would not just attack Israel back, but it would have Hezbollah attack Israel, it would have Hamas attack Israel, and it would attack American interests in the Gulf, along with probably Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and the UAE. You could see a large, and Yemen, and a large war going on. Ships in the Gulf would have a problem. So you could have a serious issue here if Israel does decide to attack. And that could very well happen. Well, I found, again, I'm sorry for repeating the same sources over and over. What I found fascinating was that President Obama in his book said that he actually thought that Israel was going to attack. And that was one of the main impetuses for him to fast track negotiations with Iran. That I found interesting, that he felt that Netanyahu was very, very close to an attack. That could happen. One last thing that's interesting is that the foreign minister of Bahrain, who was here in Israel last week, gave an interview. This is the foreign minister, and in the blue tie is an Israeli journalist named Barak Ravid, who's breaks stories all the time. If you're a Twitter person, you got to be following him on Twitter. So the Gulf states said that we need to be part of these negotiations. It's very nice that Germany is part of the negotiations and France is part of the negotiations, but there are no missiles aimed at France and Germany. The Iranian missiles are aimed at us in the Gulf. This is one of the reasons why Israel was able to sign these deals with these new Arab countries, new deals with the Arab countries, because we have a common enemy and we have a common stress point, which is Iran. Okay, that's enough on Iran. So that's points 1, 2, and 3. Let's go to the Palestinians. Something that gets us very nervous. President Trump has cut off ties with the Palestinians. Inside the State Department and the embassy, I work with people here in the Jerusalem embassy on a daily basis, and they used to meet with Palestinians just as much as they met with me. And now there has not been meetings for the last 2. They can't. They have friends that they talk to inside Palestinian communities, but as official visits, Palestinians are not allowed to do official visits, and America doesn't. I mean, Americans would love to talk to the Palestinians, even in the Trump administration, but they don't. So that's the problem. So Vice President Biden, during his campaign, promised to restore Palestinian aid. There is no aid going to the Palestinians from America. Now, there's a couple of reasons, but we have to understand there's 2 types of aid that goes to Palestinians, and this is something that you might not have seen in the news, but it's something that's very important to understand. The first type of aid is what goes to the Palestinian Authority. Okay, that's a $400 million annual check that America gives to the Palestinian Authority. That goes to infrastructure, that goes to security, that goes to Mahmoud Abbas's pocket and his son's pockets and everybody else on the payroll's pockets. That's where most of it goes to. Unfortunately, that's the truth. But then there are NGOs. I'll give you one example of an NGO. Okay, an NGO is a non-government organization. So a lot of times we think of NGOs, we think of these Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, people that are very bad actors that pretend to be. But I'll give you an example, something that'll pull at your heartstrings. There's a hospital in East Jerusalem, right across from Hebrew U, on Mount Scopus. That's a Palestinian hospital. It's actually, interestingly enough, right now the most popular hospital for those in the know to give birth in. Very interesting. They built an amazing maternity ward, and Jewish women give birth there. My wife sometimes visits her patients there, and when you walk into this hospital, they have the world's largest Palestinian flag in the lobby. I mean, it's huge. That hospital was receiving $25 million a year in American taxpayer dollars to help Palestinians with chemotherapy treatments. Okay, that's nothing to do with the Palestinian Authority. All $25 million went to chemo treatments for Palestinians. That the Trump administration cut off. And I say, how can we cut that aid off? It's straight chemotherapy. Well, the answer was very simple. The Palestinian Authority is spending $400 million a year paying terrorists and paid to slay, right? Terrorists that commit an act of terrorism against Israelis get a monthly stipend. So if the Palestinian Authority can afford pay to slay, they can afford to pay the hospital bills for this hospital. America doesn't need to come in. All funds are fungible, but they all go into one large account. So instead of paying terrorists, pay the hospital bill. If after stopping paying the terrorists, you still can't pay the hospital bills, then President Trump said, I'll be happy to cover the bill. That's no problem. But don't tell me you don't have enough money to cover chemo treatments, but you do have enough money to pay $400 million a year to terrorists. That you can't say that. That doesn't make sense. So that's the two types of aid that were cut off. They also want to reopen the PLO office in Washington. Okay, so there was a PLO office. These are more cosmetic than anything else. Doesn't really have an effect so much. But this is the sort of way, sort of recuperation of this, or rehabilitation of this relationship that they want to have. Now, there are 4 laws in Congress that prevent a president. These are new laws passed in the last 2 years. We heard a lot about them last week with Michael. So there are 4 laws that prevent aid from going to the Palestinians. That the president can't just write a check. So the Biden administration has already begun talking to the Palestinians and saying to them, listen, we'd love to help you. We made it one of the key components of our foreign policy in the campaign, but we can't help you unless you help yourselves. If you've cut off the ties with Israel, which is what they've done, if you're not cooperating with Israel, then we can't help you. So you have to start taking steps that we can then say, hey, look, good faith steps are happening now, so we have to move ahead. So right away, the Palestinians resumed security cooperation this week and resumed taking tax money from Israel, which they had said that they're not going to do. They're not going to have anything to do. So the Palestinians are already moving forward at the urging of the I don't know what you call it, the transition team of the Biden campaign. The big thing that they've pushed, and this is a report in the New York Times, I'm not sure if you saw this, but this would be the greatest change in the Palestinian community probably since it started, which is a great debate of when that happened. But since it started, which is that the Palestinians want to rework pay to slay. Right now, and I'll just do this very quickly, right now, the way that the monthly stipend is determined of how much a Palestinian terrorist receives from the Palestinian Authority, which they call welfare payments, is dependent on how long the jail sentence is. Now, how's the jail sentence that Israel hands out to a terrorist, how is that determined? By how heinous the terrorist attack is. So if you I don't know, I'm trying to think, if you try to stab somebody and fail, or you hit an Israeli and you just hit them, so you go to jail for a year, so your stipend will be very small. If you attempt a stabbing attack and get stopped, right, you'll have a longer jail sentence and your stipend will be a little larger. If you kill a Jew and get a life sentence in an Israeli jail, then your stipend will be very large. What that essentially does is it creates a sliding scale based on how heinous your terrorist attack is how much you get paid. And you can get paid a lot, right? This is a terrorist on average gets paid 6 times as much sitting in Israeli jail on this monthly stipend, 6 times than a public school teacher in the Palestinian Authority. Okay, so if you're an 18-year-old kid and you're trying to decide how am I best going to help my family, so the answer is obvious, and that's why this pay to slay program acts as an incentive. The Biden administration says, listen, we're not going to give you any aid if you're doing this. Not only that, there are now laws that prevent us from doing this. So even if we wanted to ignore it, we couldn't. So you've got to correct this. The Palestinian Authority is under tremendous pressure. If they stop these payments, they'll really be hung in the streets. The Palestinians will revolt because they don't view this as anything nefarious. They see this as just welfare payments. So the Palestinian Authority said, okay, you know what? We'll make them welfare payments. Instead of it being based on your jail sentence, we'll base it based on your family need, and we'll make it really based on welfare payments. That's the move that they've made. This is what the New York Times reported last week, based on the encouragement of the Biden team to say, listen, you've got to really change. If you don't change, then it's not going to work. Whether this is going to be just a superficial change or this will be an actual change, that remains to be seen. And that's something we have to watch like hawks. Because if this is just a superficial change and they're just calling it one thing when it's really just the same thing and the same message is getting across, then that doesn't help us at all. But if this could really be a change and the Biden administration could do this, this will be a tremendous, tremendous accomplishment on their part and an achievement that they'll have right away that we'd all have to tip our hats off to them if they could stop this type of payments. That would really be incredible. Okay, let's get to last issue, which is settlements. This is obviously, I apologize if you don't care about settlements, that's fine. But I care about settlements because I live in one. So this is very important to me. But I think it's also very important to everybody watching this. What is the Biden administration going to do about settlements? So he's not a fan of us. He does not like settlements. He thinks that they are an impediment to the two-state solution. When the annexation, which is really extending sovereignty, this plan that Bibi Netanyahu had and President Trump highlighted even more. So he was not in favor of it because he sees it as an impediment to the two-state solution, which is what he sees as the only way to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. By the way, I don't know if you could hear in the background the airplane. There's a F-16 flying above us. That normally worried me when I first moved in here, but we're on a flight practice plat, and that's just a cool thing. So I figured I'd mention it because how often do you get to hear an F-16 go by? And when the F-35s go by, we don't know because they're stealth. But in any case, so going back to the topic here, the Biden administration sees the two-state solution as the solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That is the solution, and that's the only solution that there is to the conflict. And anything that's going to stand in the way of the two-state solution is a problem. He sees settlements as standing in the way, so he does not want settlement growth, which is what you see here. Israel settlements could test ties with Joe Biden. What we're going to have to see is there's a couple of reactions that an American president can have to settlement growth. You could have President Obama's reaction, which is not one brick, and he really stopped just about all building here in the settlements. And we're not talking about new settlements. Israel doesn't create new settlements really anymore. We're talking about just building within settlements. So we have, right now we're building just in our town, we're building 60 new houses. So that's going on right now. That's already will be grandfathered in by the time he becomes president. But we have plans that we'd like to build another 300 to 500 homes. That's going to require permits. The permits have to, unfortunately, have to have American approval, because if we do it without American approval, we run into problems. So we're going to have to see if he takes President Obama's approach, which was not one brick, if he takes the approach of most American presidents, which is we don't really think this is a good idea, so you really shouldn't do this, which, by the way, was President Trump. If you look back, that was his original approach to things until somebody taught him that that's not something you should say, in which case then he stopped saying it. But he said it first to Bibi at their first meeting. He said, I don't know if these are so helpful, your settlement building. And then somebody told him you shouldn't say that anymore, and he stopped. So we've been building, that's it. And then there's just the usual, what most presidents have done, which is say that, you really shouldn't do it. We're going to criticize you publicly, but we're going to turn a blind eye. So that's my presentation here. I left 15 minutes for questions because I know of previous speakers, you had questions. I don't know if so a lot of times I'm so brilliant and my presentations are so great that it doesn't leave room for any questions. And everybody was so clear, everybody had it. But just in case, I left 15 minutes, and if not, then everybody can get a snack before we start to see them on Eruvin. But if anyone has any questions, go ahead, or arguments against what I said. Okay, I guess it was so brilliant. No.
What's the thinking about Secretary of State and what influence they'll have on the process?
So that's probably the number one position that is going to have the most effect on the U.S.-Israel relationship, is who Vice President Biden chooses as Secretary of State. From the last that I've heard, it's going to be Tony Blinken, but these things go back and forth until there's an official announcement. The number one, the reason, let me start this way. The reason why Secretary of State is so crucial is because that's who's going to be dealing with Israel. And whatever their priority is, if they put Iran as a priority, if they put settlements as a priority, if they put the Palestinians as a priority, if they try to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, let's say like John Kerry did, right? John Kerry's the perfect example. He came in as President Obama's last Secretary of State, said to President Obama, I think I can solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And President Obama said, no one can solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We tried in term number one, it's not going to happen. And he said, let me do it. And he said, okay, go ahead, you could do it. And caused us a lot of problems. And he didn't even have the confidence of the president behind him. He just had his support, but not the confidence. So if we choose a Secretary of State like that, that's going to be a problem. The number one problematic choice that would be That would be a real problem. Would be Susan Rice. Susan Rice was the NSA director, and she was the American ambassador to the United Nations under President Obama. She is not a friend of ours, not a friend at all, and she will be incredibly harsh to us. So that's what we don't want. Tony Blinken would be a great pick. If other names that are being mentioned, I'm trying to remember offhand. If you remember any of the names, so please throw them in. But those would be great picks. Tony Blinken would be a great pick, but anyone else, basically from all the names that I've seen, anyone else would be a great pick except for Susan Rice. So I know I've put my 2 cents into the people that in the Biden camp and said, please, anyone but Susan Rice. Don't give us Susan Rice. We really don't want her. Anybody else, but that's who I've heard.
And what are you basing your opinion on Susan Rice on?
So Susan Rice, when she was not so much the ambassador, but when she was the NSA director. So there was a famous article, Dennis Ross, who I heard yesterday will be coming back into play. Dennis Ross worked for every administration except for the Trump administration. And Dennis Ross is a pretty even-keeled person. He's a fan of the two-state solution, critic of settlements, huge critic of President Trump. But came in and said that Susan Rice was the most antagonistic voice against Israel in the Obama administration. And as he said, when they were inside the room, right, this is where it counts. It's when you're sitting in the Oval Office with the president and you're listening to who's giving advice and what's happening. So you want to make sure that advice is pro and supportive of Israel. And he said that she was antagonistic against it. She referred to Prime Minister Netanyahu's criticism and opposition to President Obama's plans as racist. She didn't see it as a legitimate position. She saw it as the reason why Bibi Netanyahu was taking this position was because he was racist against President Obama. That's not good. Bibi Netanyahu is going to be our prime minister for a little while. He's not going anywhere. So if Susan Rice steps back in and thinks that Bibi Netanyahu is a racist, I mean that's bad news. That's not going to be a good. Those meetings will not go well.
So, Uri, just one last comment to you. You talked about what President Trump could do to bolster the relationship on his way out of office. And Ambassador Dennis Ross, at one point in time, had suggested the idea, not relative to this, but to another situation, that the single greatest deterrent that the United States could provide to Israel was that mountain-busting bomb, as well as the aircraft in order to deliver it, since Israel doesn't have the aircraft to deliver it. Is there any talk that you've heard about that potentially happening?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'm hearing the same talk that you're hearing. I'll tell you this: the Trump administration has asked. They've been asking. I was asked by 2 people. I'm a nobody. I'm a teacher. So the fact that they're asking me shows how many people they're soliciting questions from. But what could they do on the way out to make it, to give Israel what they want? And it seems to be that Israel's allowed to give essentially a shopping list. The problem with the bunker buster bomb, as you mentioned, is that we need now a B-2 bomber. Israel does not have a B-2 bomber. The reason we don't have a B-2 bomber, and this is almost comical, but this is how it works, is because we have no runway long enough for a B-2 bomber to land on. So we have to extend our runways, which is the smallest of the problems. And then we would be able to deliver one of these bunker buster bombs, which are able to bore through a mountain to lengths of 25 meters and then explode underneath. So that would be, as Andy said, a serious deterrent to Iran. Iran has even said that they said yesterday they gave messages to all their proxies not to do anything over the next 2 months to start a problem, so that these things aren't used and aren't happening. I don't know. It seems to me that if Israel had really wanted this bunker busting bomb before, and if they really wanted the B-2 bomber, then they would have it already. That's my. It's strange that we get everything that we want militarily from the United States, and this thing we haven't been given. And President Trump especially, what does he care if he gives this to us, right? I'm saying that he was willing to sell $115 billion worth of arms to Saudi Arabia. This isn't a man that's worried about handing out, gifts to people. So I don't know why. I have a feeling Israel doesn't need it. A couple of years ago, I had a conversation with an Israeli general from the Air Force, I don't get secret information, so I'm not giving you anything secret here. And I said to him, I said, without this bunker busting bomb, could we really attack Iran's nuclear facilities and be able to destroy them? And he said, we figure everything out. Don't worry. So yes, I don't know how essential it is for us to have it, and then whether we'd have to, if it's worth it for us to take on new airplanes for that reason. So that's what I would say.
Thanks.
Yeah. I'm very surprised that nobody disagrees with me on anything that I've said so far. I know I say things with confidence, but there has to be something that people heard that they don't like and have some sort of. But if not, then we could pause here before Eruvin starts. But I'm surprised. No one has any more questions or anything else to say?
Well, could you give us some more background about that, the person who you thought would be a good choice for the Secretary of State? I hadn't heard of his name before.
Yeah, sure. So Tony Blinken was a deputy Secretary of State in the Obama administration. He was also Joe Biden's chief advisor in the first term as as vice president. He's been close to Joe Biden for about 30 years. He's a moderate as it comes to advice. The only problem is with Tony Blinken is that Tony, I'm just trying to remember the full story before, I don't like saying half stories, but at one point, Tony Blinken was the person that I'm trying to remember the full details, but Tony Blinken was the person who handed in the text of a resolution against Israel at the United Nations. It's not the last one that was done, but so again, he's not your classic, he's not Mike Pompeo. Right, he's not coming here and visiting a winery with a wine named after him. There's not going to be a Blinken bottle of wine from Sagot or Shiloh Winery. That's not going to happen. But he does understand two things. He understands the important role that Israel plays in the U.S.-Israel relationship, and understands Joe Biden sufficiently to understand how important Israel is to Joe Biden. But he will be an advocate of a two-state solution. But he's also a realist in the terms of he understands that there's not going to be an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal signed in the next 4 years, right? I think that's something that Tony Blinken does understand in the way he talks. But he was the chief foreign policy advisor to Joe Biden's campaign, and whenever there would be an in-depth briefing from the Biden campaign to Jewish groups, it would either be Tony Blinken or Ambassador Dan Shapiro, who will also play a role in the administration. They would be the ones delivering it. So he's a person that's an expert on these things. He's been in two administrations already, and he would be, again, a moderate voice for and in support of Israel.
And one other thing is I read, I've been reading some things about how people are concerned that Biden's administration would try to warm relations again with Turkey, which is really aiming for ascendancy in the region, and they are very close with the Muslim Brotherhood. What do you hear about this?
I think that the Biden administration, their general approach is going to be one of, it doesn't pay for us to have antagonistic relationships with anybody, right? We want to reach out to everybody and have friendly and cordial relations with everybody. I think that's what you're going to see is sort of this. If you remember, after George Bush left office and President Obama came in, it was sort of this outreach to the rest of the world. We know our reputations in the down in the dumps, so we want to make sure that we rehabilitate it and bring it back up. So I think that's where you're going to find a lot of their approaches. Let's reach out to people and see if we can. Now it happens to be that President Trump loves Turkey, right, and loves Erdogan, right? He just loves him because he has an affinity for leaders that share his personality and an authoritative nature. So he gets along with him very well. But that doesn't mean that the country's relationships have gone well. So I think that you're going to see, I don't think you'll see. You brought up the Muslim Brotherhood. You're not going to see the Biden administration reach out to the Muslim Brotherhood. That's not going to happen. That's
Could you comment on the agreements with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and Sudan? How much of it was the American influence, and how much of it was actually Israeli operations for a long time? And how does it change the whole Palestinian issue as Biden might see it?
Okay, so let me go step by step here. Israel was dealing with, not with Sudan, because Sudan's gone through changes themselves, but Bahrain and the UAE, Israel's had relationships with them for 10 years. They're just not public. They weren't public relationships. So they were under the table relationships, secret relationships that everybody everybody knew it. In fact, it came out that Israel had a full working embassy in Bahrain, costumed as a travel agency. So that was something that everybody knew was out there. What the Trump administration did was encouraged it to be brought out in public, and that was purely the Trump administration. That was Jared Kushner's dream from the day that he came into office, was to change the way that, and this is going to blend into your second question, was to change the way the Arab world looked at Israel as not Palestinian centric. The Palestinians didn't have to be the key to all relationships. What they love the Palestinians, they want to help the Palestinians, but they also realize that there's no reason why they should hold their own people back because the Palestinians can't get their acts together. So the Biden administration is very much in favor, but Joe Biden himself was very complimentary to President Trump and to the fact that these deals were done. He didn't take pot shots like other high-ranking Democratic officials did. He was very complimentary. He wants them to continue. He wants to add to the Abrahamic Accords, which is what these peace treaties are called, and he wants to continue them. And what's going to be interesting is how many of the old school peacemakers, the Dennis Ross, the Aaron David Millers, the Dan Shapiros, the guys' names that they were in the Clinton administration and then they went to the Obama administration and now they're going to re-enter the Biden administration. How much of the old school thinking of Palestinians, that everything has to go around the Palestinians, are they going to bring back in, or are they going to take the approach of the Trump administration, which, look, it's proven successful, right? It's a success by going to these Arab countries and saying, listen, we'll care about the Palestinians. We're not going to do the sovereignty. We're not going to do the annexation. We'll try to get a deal done, but let's move forward with normalization with Israel, so that, because it's best for everybody. That's interesting. What is also fascinating is that Saudi Arabia came out yesterday and said that they're not going to do normalization until there's a full Israeli-Palestinian peace deal. They said we're full in favor of normalization, and the UAE and Bahrain could not have done a peace treaty, a normalization deal if Saudi Arabia hadn't been in favor of it. They're under their control, so they would not have been able to do it. So they said, but we simply as Saudis can't do this deal. Maybe that changes. Maybe President Biden could change that. I don't know. We'll see if he's able to do that. I don't know. But if they come in with the old school thinking that everything has to be Palestinian centric, then it's going to present problems with more countries joining. And hopefully they'll be able to move on from there. Okay, I was able to successfully stretch this out for the full 45 minutes with questions from you guys. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody sticking in. Now, just before we go, I have to tell you, next week is not going to be like this week. It's going to be 100 times better. Oded Ravivi, the mayor of Efrat, and a international spokesperson for Judea and Samaria, will be joining us. He has an impeccable English, and he's a real pleasure to listen to. And I have to tell you, if you're going to pick 10 people who might be the prime minister of Israel in the next 25 years, I'd put him on the list. He's that big of a leader, and it's interestingly enough, he keeps passing up opportunities to run for national office. And I think he's doing that because he's waiting strategically for certain people to leave so that he can then step in at a certain point. That's my guess. But it'll be a pleasure anyway to listen to no matter what. And so you should come next week at 10 a.m. Come to this channel right here. We're going to be here waiting for you. Okay, so now we're going to transition to Eruvin. So we'll wait a couple minutes for people to join in. We're going to have a Siyum on Eruvin. You should definitely stick around. We're going to be talking first about nuance in the Torah, and then we're going to have a Siyum from Noam. So it's going to be exciting. Okay.
Just want to say Yasher Koach to Uri on an outstanding job as always. It's always great to get your insights, and it's a what better way to start Sunday morning than to do it with Uri and the great speakers that we have. So, and thank you for everyone making the effort to come out. And like Uri said, we'll start in just a minute or two with our Siyum. So Yasher Koach, Uri.
Thank you.
Very interesting.
Let's give everyone a fair chance to join us here.
I'll come back.
David, is there anyone else that you know for sure that we're waiting for besides Noam?
So the link in the weekly email that you guys sent out was wrong. I had emailed David to send me an updated link. That's how I got in here.
Oh.
There might be other people having the same issue that I did.
Interesting.
Hey, Noam.
Rabbi, can you put everybody on mute?
I believe I cannot, but David or Uri can.
Okay.
They're using my accounts. I'm a guest in this room right now.
I'm trying to figure out how to do that from here.
Uri, if you could make me a co-host, because I also have the Hadron in the last page copy that I can put on the screen.
Just hit the three little buttons next to the name.
That I know how to do. How to mute everybody. I'm trying to figure out.
Well, David can do that now that he's a co-host.
Once,
Oh, true.
once you,
Okay.
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 Well, before we get started, I just want to just one word of introduction before we get to hear from Uri and get on with our Siyum. I have to tell you just how impressed I am with all the many men and women who have maintained their Daf Yomi study. In some ways, this has been extra challenging during this time to find the time to learn the Daf. We're not together the way that we normally would be. We don't have the chizuk of all, being able to schmooze over Kiddush with the learning that we've done. But at the same time, I think it's kind of appropriate for us to be finishing Eruvin now. Eruvin, we'll hear more about this, but Eruvin obviously talks about Eruvs, that's the topic of choice, and in many ways talks about not only holy spaces, how we make spaces holy, but also how we bring people together in those spaces. And certainly our learning has been something that has brought so many of us together. And it's really been a joy for me to watch how it's blossomed and how so many people are continuing the learning. And there's really no better way to prepare for Pesach. I know Pesach sounds like it's a long way away, but it's really not so far away. No better way to start preparing for Pesach by starting Pesachim right away. And you'll make a Siyum right before Pesach. And you can make your own Siyum for Tanis Bechorim. So now's the perfect time. If you haven't been on the bandwagon, now's the time to get on. What better way to kind of usher in the next segment until we get to the next major set of holidays with Pesach. But with that, we're excited to invite Rabbi Uri Pilichowski to share some words of introductory Torah before we continue with the Siyum by our very own Noam Vanderwald.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi. And I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak some words of Torah here and echo your words of Yasher Koach to all that have completed Eruvin. I can't put myself in that list this round. But I want to talk about one issue that I found in Maseches Eruvin that I'm not going to talk about Eruv itself, but one issue that I found in Maseches Eruvin that I think is incredibly important when it comes to Torah study, and that's nuance in Torah study. The Gemara in a couple different places talks about this pasuk Lo b'shamayim hi, that the Torah is not in the heavens, right? And what does that mean? So there's a lot of different interpretations. We're going to look at one that it first finds itself in a Gemara in Bava Metzia. The Gemara in Bava Metzia tells the story of Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim who were having a debate, and their debate centered around Tumah Tahara status of an oven. And the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer disagreed. Both of them felt that they were both correct in their opinions, and Rabbi Eliezer tried to prove his opinion. So the first way Rabbi Eliezer tried to prove his opinion was pointing to a carob tree outside, and he said you'll see if I'm right, if my opinion is correct, then that carob tree will move 100 amos away. It'll be uprooted and sent 100 amos away. It happened. The tree was uprooted and moved away, and the Chacham said that's very nice. That's a great trick, but that's not how we decide halacha. So Rabbi Eliezer, frustrated, said, "Okay, I'll show you with the walls of this very Beit Midrash," and said that the walls of the Beit Midrash will come start tumbling in if I'm correct. And the walls of the Beit Midrash of the study hall started to cave in, and the Chacham said, "Great trick, but that is not how we decide halacha." So he said, "I'll show you that I'm right. I will have Hakadosh Baruch Hu b'chavodo v'atzmo." Hakadosh Baruch Hu himself will announce that I am correct. And God, in a bat kol, came out and said, yes, he is correct. He's right. That's the halacha is in accordance with him. And the Chacham said, nice trick. And Akash Baruch Hu, we obviously give you kavod, but not in the Beit Midrash. We don't. That's not how we paskin halacha. Lo b'shamayim, God, you wrote. You said that that the halacha is not, the Torah is not in the heavens. It was handed down to the Chachamim, and therefore we are in the majority in this case against Rabbi Elazar, and therefore the halacha will be practiced on in accordance with our opinion and not Rabbi Elazar, because we don't pay attention to Akash Baruch Hu when that comes. And here's where we find a Gemara in Eruvin. This is where we're going to find a Gemara in Eruvin that discusses the great debates between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. So this is for those of you that did finish Eruvin and study. Do you remember all the way back on Daf Yud Gimel, right? So this is a couple of months ago. So when the machlokas between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, I talked about that for 3 years. The two schools of thought disagreed, and then the announcement came out from the Bakol that we're going to follow Beit Hillel's opinion against Beit Shammai. So it wasn't because Beit Hillel is always more lenient. That's not how they made the decision. But they made the decision based on the fact that Beit Hillel would always, when they taught the halacha, they would start the halacha with Beit Shammai's teaching. As they were 100%, they thought that the teachings, their opinion was correct. Without a doubt, Beit Hillel felt that they were correct, but they would make sure to teach Beit Shammai's opinion first. And they wanted to make out of deference and out of respect, and the idea that just because they felt that they were correct doesn't mean there wasn't value in their opponent's position. But not only would they teach it, would they teach it first, but they made sure to not only teach it, but teach their opinions first. In other words, they wouldn't state their opinions. This is what we feel. And then this is what Beit Shammai, they would start with Beit Shammai's opinion, showing true. I mean, this is the example par excellence of not only respect and deference, but of nuance, of understanding that there are multiple ways of looking at the Torah, and that's how that's why Beit Hillel was chosen to that the practice would follow Beit Hillel, because they showed this nuance, this idea of that there are many different opinions when it comes to the Torah. The bat kol that we talked about in the beginning, it's fascinating. What is a bat kol, right? What is the idea of a bat kol? And this is, look, I'm no expert in divine voices, so I don't want to go ahead and start talking about the difference. This is not my area of expertise. I don't really have an area of expertise, but for sure not bat kol and prophecy. But I'll just quote the Rambam and the Moreh Nevuchim, who says that it's not the level of prophecy. A bat kol isn't the same way that a classic Nevi'im, classic prophets heard messages from God. But a bat kol is something else completely. A bat kol is, and he gives the example of, if you remember Hagar. So Hagar, he says, was not a prophetess, but if you remember when she was thrown out of her house and she's sitting with Yishmael in the desert, and she doesn't know what's going to be with her baby, and she hears, go back, everything's going to be okay, you're going to be fine. So that was what the Rambam says is a bat kol. How I understand the Rambam is that there's a difference between a conclusion that you come to yourself intellectually, and then there's prophecy at the other extreme, right, where you are given information on a divine level. There's somewhere in between. Where you understand things, outside of your own intellectual capabilities, but at the same time, it's nowhere near what prophecy is all about. I think that's what Rabbi Elazar was hearing in the Beit Midrash, and what the Chachamim were hearing. And this comes down to this idea of Shivim Panim Torah, and Elu ve'elu Divrei Elokim Chaim. And the Ritva brings a question that the French rabbis asked, right? This is the Rabbanei Tzarfat. And this question is about 700-800 years old. And they said, hold on a second. How could Elu ve'elu, you have a debate between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, and you're going to say that both opinions are valid? How is that possible? It's one or the other. What does this mean? There's one correct answer. You can't tell me that Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai could be diametrically opposed in their opinions, and they are both correct. How does that possible? How does that work? And they answer with a medrash that talks about that when Moshe went up to Har Sinai, Moshe sat on Har Sinai, and Kadosh Baruch Hu said, "Here's the sugya that we're going to be learning at this moment. there are 49 ways that I can present an argument to show you that this idea is this action is prohibited, and I can advance 49 arguments to show you how it's permitted. And Moshe Rabbeinu obviously says, okay, well, which one is it? So Kadosh Baruch Hu says, no, that's not how it works. Lo b'shamayim, going back to our pasuk, it's going to be up to the Rabbanim to decide. The Chachamim of each generation are going to explain to us how to follow the Torah. So even Kadosh Baruch Hu says, look, there's nuance in the Torah. It's not about what this one objective truth and one answer out there that is 100% correct, and that's emes Moshe Misinai. That's exactly the opposite. In fact, in every generation, we're going to be able to rediscuss and debate these topics and come to a different decision. And I think that when we talk about nuance in the Torah, I think that I'd like to end off on this subject of nuance in the Torah. When we talk about lo b'shamayim, is take this opinion that the Rambam brings up from the Gemara, which says, what's the explanation of lo b'shamayim? Lo me'ver layami, lo b'shamayim, lo b'gasei haruach u'mitzuya. It's not found, the Torah is not found, success in Torah learning is not found among the proud and the arrogant. Because if you are full of pride and you are full of arrogance and you study something, you're going to say, my way is the only way. It's the only way of understanding something, but that's not the way. The Gemara in Eruvin discusses Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai and says that we follow Beit Hillel for the reason of they showed nuance in the Torah. They show that there are multiple ways of understanding the Torah, and it's important to recognize that. And somebody who's proud will never get to that level. The Gasei Ruach will never understand that there's nuance, that we have to respect other opinions. And that's the idea of lo b'shamayim. And I'd like to end just with one last Gemara in Eruvin, because this Gemara in Eruvin, this I have to say about many Gemaras, this is for me, who's somebody who has so much trouble learning and so much trouble understanding things and has to work so hard. The Gemara talks about, this is the Gemara on Nun Hey on the base, so it's a little closer to us making our siyum here. And Noam, you're on 2-minute warning here, okay? So I'm giving you the 2-minute warning. You're about to start because I'm about to end. But the Gemara talks about how we have to make charts and signs and symbols to be able to understand our learning. That it's not, we can't always keep everything in our cup. Not everything is able to be held into our head. A lot of times we have to write down things and take notes and charts, and especially in Eruvin, all the new Gemaras with the pictures and all the different things that we can now see things. That's how we have to learn. And that's where lo b'shamayim, this is the other idea of lo b'shamayim, that a lot of times we look at Torah learning and say it's so difficult. The rabbi just talked about psachim. If we're going to start learning now and go all the way, yeah, you could do it. It is possible. Right, so and that is possible. It's not loba. It's not b'shamayim. It's not me'ever layam. The Torah isn't so far. It's not so distant. Especially if we come up with ways to make Torah learning easier for us. And Daf Yomi, how much easier could we make this for us? It's still harder. But there are shiurim online. There's tons of shiurim for every single flavor and every single thing that people like. It's so accessible. It's not easy, but it's accessible nowadays. And that's something that's lo b'shamayim. It's not something that we have to cross into the heavens or cross the seas in order to accomplish it. You don't even have to come to Eretz Yisrael to learn Daf Yomi. You could stay in Memphis, Tennessee, and successfully finish Shas through Daf Yomi. So I'm going to hand this over, Rabbi. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Noam, we're going to make you the spotlight here, and you make the siyum, because this is your celebration, everybody else's.
Yasher koach to Uri, and also Noam, before you get started, I just want to welcome Rabbi Joel Finkelstein, who is a long-time experienced Daf Yomi learner and teacher. A perfect way to start to every day to study with Rabbi Finkelstein for those who are interested. He teaches Daf Yomi, but I want to welcome him to our siyum as well. Noam, take it away, my friend.
Sure. Thank you, first of all, to everybody for giving me this opportunity. We're going to start from Rabbi Shimon Omer, so this last sugya, which goes back to the last part of the final Mishnah, which is actually a fitting end to Masechet Eruvin, as it was extremely confusing to me, as was almost the entire Masechta. So we'll just start from Rabbi Shimon Omer. So essentially going back to the Mishnah, where Rabbi Shimon says that whenever the sages permitted something, they they granted it only from your own. So the Gemara asks Rabbi Shimon, Heichakai, what Mishnah is he talking about to formulate this principle? So Hatam Kai, it's non Misha Hechshich Chutzl Tchum Afilu Ama Achat Lo Yikanes Rabbi Shimon Omer afilu 15 ama yikanes lefi she'ein hamishachot mamatzin et hamidot b'mnei ha'toam. So essentially, he teaches this principle from a Mishnah that we actually learned a little while back. So somebody who is outside of the Shabbat limit and it grows dark, even if he's only 1 amma outside the limit, he is not he's not allowed to enter the town. Rabbi Shimon says no, even if he's 15 cubits outside the limit, he's allowed to enter the town, because essentially when the surveyors create the Shabbat limit, they don't do it precisely. So rather they position the boundary mark within about 2,000 cubit limits, and because sometimes there are people who make errors. So even if you're 15 amot outside, you're still allowed to come back inside. And so I think Rabbi Shimon here is trying to explain why he's lenient in this situation, but he's stringent in another situation. So, and we'll get to that in a minute. So, Deka Amar Tana Kama Lo Yikanes, or Amar Le Rabbi Shimon Yikanes. So with that which the first Tana says that he's not allowed to enter, Rabbi Shimon says he is allowed to enter. And again, his reasoning is that the limit does not extend that far, as any area that the sages granted a person was actually permitted to him by Torah law. And then the next part, it says of the Mishnah, Shelo hitiru lecha ela mishum shvut. So those things the sages permit to you, only activities prohibited due to rabbinic decree, but not actions prohibited by actual Torah law. So Hechakai, again, what Mishnah is he talking about here? Or where did he get this? Hatam Kai, the Amar Tana Kama Koshra va'Amar Le Rabbi Shimon Onva. So actually here we're going back to something that we did more recently. So the Gemara asks, again, where is he learning this from? So he taught it on the basis of the Mishnah, where the first Tana says that with regard to a string of a harp that breaks on Shabbat in the temple, that the first Tana there says that you're allowed to tie it with a knot, and Rosh Shimon says no, he's only allowed to tie it with a bow, not a knot. And what's the reason for that? So Aniva delo ate lidei chiv chatat sharule rabbanon. Kishira da'ate lidei chiv chatat lo sharule rabbanon. So the reason here is only forming a bow is permitted, is that when you form a bow, it doesn't lead to having to give a carbon chatat. As forming a bow cannot is not a violation category of the prohibited labor of tying, according to the rabbis. That tying a bow is okay. So consequently, the sages said is okay. The Rabbanim say it's okay. However, with regard to tying a knot, which can lead to having to give a carbon chatat when performed outside the temple, the sages do not permit it. And Rabbi Shimon says that the sages permitted only activities, again, whose prohibition involves a rabbinic decree. And that is the end of the Masechta. Do you want me to keep going, or is somebody else's?
Do we have so some of the other people who have finished, a few of the other people who have finished the Masechta are going to participate in reading the Hadran. I'm going to start off with Dan Weiss, and then Yafit Fishbach, Mark Lennon, Rebecca Kaplowitz, and Donnie Emerson. Each will read a paragraph. So I will let each of you unmute yourselves as it comes to your paragraph and continue.
Hadran alach Masechet Eruvin v'Hadran alan. Datan alach Masechet Eruvin v'Datach alan. La nitnashe minach Masechet Eruvin v'la titnashe minan. La be'alma haden v'la be'alma de'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Eruvin v'Hadran alan. Datan alach Masechet Eruvin v'Datach alan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Eruvin v'lo titnashe minan. La be'alma haden v'la be'alma de'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Eruvin v'Hadrach alan. Datan alach Masechet Eruvin v'Datach alan. La nitnashe minach Masechet Eruvin v'la titnashe minan. La be'alma hadena v'la be'alma de'ate.
Yehi ratzon l'fanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elokei Avotinu shetehei Toratcha u'manutenu ba'olam hazeh u'tehei imanu la'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachash bar Papa, Surchav bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa.
הערב נא אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך בפינו ובפיפיות עמך בית ישראל, ונהיה כולנו אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה, מאויבי תחכמני מצוותיך כי לעולם היא לי, Yehi libi tamim michukecha leman lo evosh lelam lo ashkach pikudecha. Kivam chi tani baruch ata Adonai lamdeni chukecha. Amen, amen, amen. Selah va'ed.
Yehirat Somo Fenecha Adonai El Hai, Kishem Shazartani, Lisayim, Masechet Eruvin, Kain Tazrani, Lahatchil, Masechtot, Usfarim Acherim, Lisayimam, Lilmod, Lulamed, Lishmor, Vlasot, Ulakayim, Kol Divrei Talmud, Soratcha, Vahaba, Uzachut, Kol Hatanaim, Vamoraim, Vitamidei, Chachamim, Yamodli, Lizari, Shalot Tamush, Torah Mipi, Umipi, Zari, Vizera Zari, Adolam, Vitkayim Bi, Bitalechacha, Tanchea otach b'shachpecha tishmor alecha v'hakitzot hi tisichecha. Kivi yirbe yamecha v'yosifu lecha shnot chayim. Orach yimim b'minah v'smola osher v'chabod. Adonai ozli amo yitain Adonai v'rechad amo b'shalom.
Mazel tov, mazel tov. A big yasher koach to everyone who's made the commitment. Now is the perfect time to get involved and start your learning for Pesachim, and we can't wait to see this group continue to learn and to grow. Yasher koach, especially yasher koach to Noam for finishing up the Masechta. Yasher koach to Uri, and like I said, to everyone who's made this amazing accomplishment. Mazel tov.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov. Mazel tov.
Thank you.
Mazel tov, Noam.
Mazel tov. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mazel tov.
All right, mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
Stay healthy, everyone.
Man.
Man.